Hey, how's it going? It's nice to see you again. So recently, I just graduated from college. And with it has come the expected existential crisis and phase of life questioning. It's been a joy! But in an attempt to make some sense of the chaos that is a new chapter of my life, I wanted to take a retroactive look at 5 of my favorite albums that not only have helped shape me as a musician and a creative, but also have helped inform my life experience. Especially when you're trying to figure out the direction you're heading in or what you want out of life, I think it's important to try and figure out why you like the things that you like, or why you do the things that you do. And this is kind of an attempt to not only talk about some cool music and to appreciate the work, but also figure out why I like stuff. In the past week or so, I've re-listened to all of the albums that are on this list. That being said, it is a list. I thought this would be a good format to talk about these albums for the sake of brevity, but no album on this list is better or worse than any other one. It's just fun to make a list. Also, there were many albums that were not able to make the cut. So I wanted to talk about those because, again, I don't think any of these albums are better or worse than one another. So before we talk about the top 5, here are some that strike my fancy. I've got some notes and the track lists on my phone, so I will be glancing at that. But before we start, feel free to grab a drink, grab a cup of tea, and let's talk about some music. What better way to spend a Saturday? I'm gonna speed through the 10 that first came to mind when I was assembling this list, but there's many others that I totally left off. For example, Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. I know for many of you, that will be top 10, top 5, maybe even your favorite album. But for me, I discovered that later, not later in life, because I grew up on Pink Floyd, but I've only started to become familiar with it in my 20s now. So it has not had quite the same impact as some of these other albums. But without further ado, here's number 15, Tyler, the Creator's Igor. It's a lovely hip-hop album that draws from so many different influences and has such a unique sound, and more importantly than the sound, the energy of this album is unparalleled. I think Tyler has taken an approach with transposing his vocals to a higher pitch or a lower pitch, really being experimental with his rap style, his singing, his flows, and all of this comes together for a really cohesive project. It's energetic, it's bombastic, it hits me in the feels every time, and it's so unhinged in like the way that I want to be in Unhinged. It's like contained unhinged, contained chaos, and that I love. So that's why it's number 15. Also, it has accompanied me on many hard times in my life when I was dealing with things that were similar to what he's talking about on Igor. Who doesn't like a love story, even if it's bad, or the outcome is bad? And this is one such example. Number 14, Gorillaz' Plastic Beach. Yep, you know it. It is our favorite virtual band. Gorillaz needed to be on this list in one way or another because they've had such a profound influence on my entire life. I remember being a 15-year-old listening to Demon Days and being so stunned at how beautiful the productions were and realizing that you could blend so many different genres. But I think Plastic Beach takes the top spot because it is such a varied album. There are so many different genres, so many different collaborations that I think are used better than collaborations on other Gorillaz projects. They're all amazing, fantastic, but this one especially hits. This might be a reoccurring theme, but I really like albums that set you in a world or in a sphere that you can kind of get lost in, and Gorillaz' Plastic Beach is one such album. Okay, number 13, Bon Iver, Forever Ago. Our favorite indie darling, besides Mac DeMarco, I suppose. But this album, I remember being blackout drunk and waking up the next morning feeling like I was gonna die my freshman year of college. And the only thing that could take the pain away was Bon Iver's Forever Ago. It's just so comforting in a melancholic way that, especially these days, I really crave. I really like the contrast of serene beauty and difficult topics and difficult emotions. Not only to mention, you know, if you're nerdy like me, you know this album was recorded on a Shure SM57. I have one lying around here at some point, somewhere. You know, I have this mic stand that I use to make sure I'm in focus. Sure SM57 clip. But the story really resonated with me, hearing about how Justin Vernon stowed himself away in a cabin, shut out the outside world, and just made an album with a minimalist amount of equipment and instruments. And that is still to this day super inspiring. The harmonies on here and the vocal work it's unbelievable. So that's why it's number 13. Number 12 goes to Nutrimilk Hotel in the Aeroplane Over the Sea. I have it on vinyl. I think that more than anything else shows how much of an indie nerd I am. Ugh. There's so much to love about In the Aeroplane Over the Sea. It is one of the more unique listens of my life, especially hearing it for the first time, because I'm not used to hearing folk or folk rock presented in such a... It's lo-fi, but it's not. It's just so aggressive and it's mastered so loud, and it's just like... They use the wall of sound in a really effective way, especially on cuts like Holland 1945. There's so many standout moments, like the marching band qualities of some of the songs and the instrumentals. And I think Jeff Magnum's lyrics and storytelling is so unparalleled. And the way that he uses his voice, I don't know how you can have such incredible breath control. I love the way that this album comes together sonically and how it interweaves with the storytelling that's going on about Anne Frank. And it's just such a moment in time, especially a cultural icon of the 90s. So for that reason, that's why it's number 12. Number 11, The Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. Because of course it is. Brian Wilson is a genius. What can you say about this? It's one of the best records of all time that you'll find on many such lists as this one. And the reason why I love it is because it sounds like history. Somehow this album is so rooted during that era, but unbelievably timeless simultaneously. It's mind-boggling. It's so pretty. I just adore how serene the vocal harmonies are and how down-tempo some of the songs are, like Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulder, God Only Knows. There's so many things about this that I could talk about, and it would take me all day to discuss all the finite elements, but you know why this one's up here. It's a great album, one of the best of all time, if I do say. Coming in at number 10, Madvillainy by Madvillain. I couldn't not include MF Doom on here. Of course. I just listed In the Aeroplane Over the Sea. I'm gonna talk about MF Doom. This album fundamentally reestablished how I think about hip hop. And I actually came into it later on. I started listening to MF Doom in 2019-ish. At first, when you listen to it, it sounds so unique and new because of the structure and the way that Madlib is able to arrange beats and how they can create songs out of unconventional song structure. And I just absolutely love that. MF Doom's bars, it's not even worth comparing anybody to because it's just that good. It would take away from the joy of other artists' work. MF Doom is just MF Doom. And I'm still looking to his work to this day to figure out ways to reinvent myself as a lyricist. And it's such a bop. Number 9. Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti. I love rock and roll. I grew up on it. Both of my parents love rock and roll. It's only natural that a Led Zeppelin album would find its way out here. It's such a lovely combination of blues and rock music, and the songwriting really ascends any sense of the music being derivative. I know that's a really common critique of Led Zeppelin's music, that they owe everything to blues and black musicians, and that's absolutely true. But I think they take pre-established genres and conventions and build upon them and add to the vocabulary of rock music as a whole. But at the end of the day, if it feels good, it is good. Yes, it would not exist without all of the history behind it. I'm just glad to have both of those things. I think it's wonderful. Going to the actual album of Physical Graffiti itself, the opener, Custard Pie, you have Houses of the Holy, you have Kashmir, you have Down by the Seaside, you have 10 Years Gone, you have Black Country Woman, the Wonton song. It is just full of absolute stellar songs, front to back. It's a pretty expansive listen, too. I don't think I would change it for any of their other albums. 4 is great. I love 4. I love 2. But Physical Graffiti, it has a place in my heart. Next, at number 8, Miles Davis, Kind of Blue. It's Miles Davis, Kind of Blue. It is probably the best jazz album of all time. I don't like putting titles on that because it feels, the classic quote is comparison is the thief of joy. But albums like this deserve to be talked about with a sort of prestige because they have inspired not only jazz music prior, but it still inspires jazz musicians today. One of my favorite phrases is your blank's favorite blank, and this is one of those. It's your favorite jazz musician's favorite jazz album. It just really establishes itself as such a monolith of the jazz scene. And again, speaking of music that comes from history, it really speaks about all of the jazz history that has come before it and encapsulates it in one of the tightest jazz albums I've ever heard in my life. I mean, the band on this thing, it's unreal. I saved this album for really specific listens because I don't want to overplay this album because it's just that good. Number 7, Stevie Wonder's Fulfillingness' first finale. This is one of those where I'm trying to choose one album from every artist that I would deem favorites of all time, and Stevie Wonder, of course, has to make this list because not only did I grow up on Stevie Wonder, as I did most of this music, but I've also rediscovered his music recently in the past 3 years and have really been diving back in his discography. And I think that's one of the really cool parts about doing a project like this video is I get to revisit albums that I grew up with and I know I love. But like I said in the beginning, I'm discovering why I like these albums. It's really interesting to observe how my reaction changes to the music over time. Every time I put on Fulfillingness' first finale, this album absolutely puts a smile on my face. I mean, just the opener, Smile Please. It's an invitation to have a good time, and it carries you throughout the rest of the album. I mean, you have every song is just unbelievable. Heaven is a Zillion Light Years Away, Too Shy to Say, Boogie on Reggae Woman, Creepin'. I mean, I could read the whole thing, but you get the idea. It's, I think, his most concise album. That's not to say I enjoy it any less or more than other of his work, because I love it all the same. It's all just Stevie Wonder, and it's on that echelon of incredible, talented musicians that anything that they make, you're just like, yep, this is awesome. This slot could easily go to an album like Songs in the Key of Life, or Inversions, or Talking Book. I don't know, any of these albums could contend for this, but like I said, I'm happy to have all of them because it's more music for me to love. The instrumentation is so uniquely Stevie, and I think he brings a cohesiveness to the project because he's playing a lot of the instruments. Whenever I need a pick-me-up, I turn to R&B and soul music a lot of the time, jazz. It's all kind of blended together a little bit. But this is one of those albums that puts me in a good mood every time I hear it. All right, we're almost out of the list, and I've been recording for 24 minutes. I just love talking about music, and this next one I'm really gonna love talking about. Number 6 is Talking Heads' Remain in Light. Another album that I grew up with, but didn't discover how much I love it until I revisited it. Because these are albums that you take for granted as you grow up with them. They're just a part of who you are as a person. And now I'm seeing why that's the case. And Talking Heads is a band that has recontextualized how I think about grooves and how I think about spoken word / lyricism / performative vocals. Essentially, my view of the role of a vocalist is completely changed forever because of David Byrne. And the way that I think about funk and groove music is so different. And the way that this album combines these movements of instruments that come in and out while maintaining a similar energy throughout is really a triumph. As a musician in 2023, loops are the death of me, and this is one of those albums that really helps me break out of that mindset because loops are just another tool like anything else. And when put into use effectively, they can be just as viable as a composition technique as any others. This is one of those albums that, even though a lot of the instrumentation and the arrangements are sections of repeated phrases, the way that they interweave creates a complexity that I don't hear a lot of, especially in this sort of style. This album has shaped the way that I view rhythm. I think it can be very much compared to straight grooves in comparison to polyrhythmic grooves, where, say, for example, a 3 against 2, that's really interesting, even though it's, and then just triplets. It's the combination of the two that creates such a unique and layered experience. 2 of my favorite songs of all time, Born Under Punches and Once in a Lifetime, are both on this album, and that feels so crazy. On top of all the other incredible musicianship and songs that are on this album. For example, Listening Wind is something that I've only really understood in the past several years. The first time I heard it, I didn't think he was telling a story, although it's so clear and painful to me now, but it's just telling the story of being invaded by foreign Americans and bombing a bunch of Americans, which, especially for 1980, is a really interesting take and a thing to write about in an album. And for that reason, among all the other things that I've said, is why Talking Heads' Remain in Light is on this list. But those are my shout outs. Now I'm gonna really talk about music. So without further ado, here are my 5 favorite albums of all time. I've got some of them on vinyl, so I'll go grab them real quick. In one way or another, all of these albums have helped shape who I am, and without them, I don't know what I would do. I would be a much more boring person, I'll tell you that. So I wanted to tell you the story of how I got into these albums and why they mean so much to me, to be able to illustrate how these albums have come to be on this status. So to begin the list, number 5, Daft Punk, Random Access Memories. I was 13 when this album came out. I remember playing a bunch of modded Minecraft servers with one of my old friends, listening to this on repeat, day after day. Daft Punk is a band that I knew at the time through my cousin, and I was really starting at this time specifically, starting to grow out of my parents' musical taste and develop one for myself. And this is one of those albums that has absolutely accomplished that. I listened to it last night as I dug some weeds from the garden and I had my AirPods in. I love it no less than I did 10 years ago, which is a wild thing to say. I chose this album in part because of how much it means to music as a whole. I think it's, without a doubt, Daft Punk is the greatest electronic dance group of all time. Homework and Discovery and the live album means so much to me, and they mean so much to a lot of people. Is Random Access Memories their best album? I don't think so because of history, but to me, this is the album, especially looking back, knowing that this is their last album, this is the one that impacted my life the most. I mean, just the first track, Give Life Back to Music, is this ode to history and to feeling. And I kind of had a profound thought while I was listening to this last night. This was made in 2013. The 90s, the early 2000s, and the beginning 2010s was the rise of computers and the renaissance of music technology, at least in the digital sense. And I think we lost a lot of the characteristics of what it means to give life to music. I think not all music falls into this realm, but when I look back at music from the 90s and music from the early 2000s, like, it's some of my least favorite music ever. And I think some of that is because of how sterile everything is, because we were just finding out how to do digital right. And I'm not saying that this is their intention, but especially 10 years after they released it, it feels like, knowing where we are now and knowing that a lot of musicians and bands are returning to an analog approach. And when I say analog, I also mean like real people sitting in a room playing instruments with each other. I've said this time and time again, but nothing will ever sound like that unless you're actually in the same room as somebody making the music. You can track things separately all you want. That's how I make my music, but it will never sound like 4 people in a room. And I think Random Access Memories does that beautifully. It captures the essence of, again, the history that had to build for this album to even exist. For example, Giorgio by Moroder, I just butchered that, but he tells the story of electronic music coming about and how he was sleeping in his car to go track stuff in the studio. And I know almost every line of that speech. And it's incredible how much that story has stuck with me. And for all you nerds out there, you know that for the different eras he's talking about, they used different mics of the time to record the voiceover. And that is so cool. And that's a fact that Daft Punk, they were doing it for them. Giorgio questioned them on why they were doing that, because nobody would care. That is not true, because me, 10 years down the road, an engineer, recording artist, that is the thing that I look at and I go, that made me want to be an engineer. And just the way that this album sounds and the way that it's produced, it's immaculate. I don't think there are very many albums that do a better job at sonics than Random Access Memories. The orchestras on this thing sound so lush. You can hear all of the different parts and you can hear how beautiful the intonation is. I'm trying to stay away from subjective terms like beautiful, but this is one of those albums that demands such a subjective term. But the game of love and how funky and the guitars on that song just bring out so much emotion. And I admit, if you saw me last night in the garden, there was a lot of dancing involved, because this album, every song is just a groove. The drum production sounds so flawless. The hi-hats have a brilliance to them, but aren't sharp. The snare body has a lot of energy, but it's still able to be heard throughout all the mix. I mean, I could go on and on and on. I actually think that this album specifically is one of the albums that got me into electric piano, and it's what made me incorporate that sort of production into my own music a lot more. I love the electric piano. I love a good Rhodes or a Wurlitzer, and this album, electric piano is all over the place on here. You can hear hammers hitting the tuning forks. I mean, that's a simplification of how electric pianos work, but you can actually hear the mechanics of how that instrument is coming about. Within is such an expansive, moving track that starts with this nice piano ballad, which, again, I think I get a lot of my inspiration from harmony and the way that I think about the piano from albums like this, and the way that it kind of transforms into a show tune, sorta, and then blossoms into this like spatial synthy thing, and it's like, oh, the vocoders, hold on, oh my god, oh. Instant crush, Julian Casablancas, everybody. A lot of these albums that I'm talking about, I can construct the songs in my brain, and I can almost hear every single part and piece of instrumentation happening on this album, and that just speaks to how catchy and thought out this album really is, because all of the parts are memorable. Also, before hearing this record at 13, I didn't know who the Strokes were, so I didn't know who Julian Casablanca was. I was just like, this is cool, I love this. Casablancas? Lose Yourself to Dance. I mean, the opening shimmers, and then the guitar groove. Nile Rodgers, is it? It was Nile Rodgers. I mean, his work is all over this album, and I didn't even know him before this album, which was one of the joys of exploration as a 13-year-old, like hearing all of these famous artists talk about their work or play what they've been doing for their whole lives on this album without knowing why it's great. I just hear it and I thought to myself, wow, so this is what music is like. I mean, imagine how formative that must be. Touch with Paul Williams, still to this day. I almost cried last night, and I've had this reaction while revisiting these albums a lot, because they mean so much to me. But especially as a 23-year-old looking back, it's really wild, because I think I interpreted the lyrics totally different when I was a 13-year-old. I mean, of course, how could you view them the same way after 10 years of life? But I just took the story at face value when I heard it initially about, it's a robot or something that wants to touch again. And touch, You've almost convinced me I'm real. But now I hear that song and I think about the people who are writing that and I go, oh my God, that's one of the most relatable things I've ever heard. Because it's, especially now in 2023, which to me seems like such a touch-deprived time, especially for my generation. It's so because of that, it just speaks so much to my experience and what a lot of other people are going through. And it's just stunning how it's able to, again, take such a timeless story approach to something that feels so grounded in now, but is informed by history. I know that's a lot, but it's just a wonderful song. The next one, Get Lucky with Pharrell Williams. I mean, you heard it to death for the last 10 years. So I won't talk about it. But it's a banger. It's a groove. One of the best dance songs ever. Pop dance songs. I don't know what you call that genre. Beyond. I think Beyond is one of those songs that just illustrates what Daft Punk is capable of. The vocoders are classic Daft Punk, and just the way that the orchestra and the arrangement intermingles with the vocoder to contrast such an electronic sound with such organic instrumentation, it creates a really unique experience. And that's what really speaks to this whole philosophy of this record, because it's some of the most famous electronic musicians of all time stopping what they're doing and creating a record so indebted to instruments and people being together and musicians performing. It's really stunning. Also, the drumming on this whole album, oh my God, it's perfect. It's I hate calling things perfect, but this is one of those examples that, I wouldn't change anything about it. Motherboard, the synths on this thing, the way that they play with resonance and cutoff and the way that their synth sounds evolve over time, it's so meticulous and artful. And again, the way that it plays with like the wind instruments and the orchestra, like I can hear the strings going ba 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 ba. Like it's just, those melodies have stuck with me and definitely inform my vocabulary as a musician. Fragments of Time, what a palate cleanser, a shift of energy into the album. The pedal steel or the slide guitar adds so much atmosphere, and just the way that Todd Edwards delivers the vocals feels like almost croonery, but it's everything that I love about music, essentially. Doing It Right featuring Panda Bear. I was singing this one. This is the one where I was really dancing and getting down to, because it just feels so good and it feels like such a return to the moment if you're listening to it. Like it really reminds you to look at life and what you're doing and to do it right. Those Doing It Right, everybody will be dancing and be doing it right. I mean, that refrain, that hook, one of the most earworming things I've ever heard. And then lastly, Contact. What better way to end a career? On the huge, is it an organ? I don't even know. But like the part after the speech about the UFO or the field recorded audio, it's just so grand and it feels like such a great conclusion, even though it's just an instrumental track. I remember putting this on for people in the car as like people's parents were driving me around at like age 15 and then being like so not connected with it. It's just, I have a lot of memories of listening to this album that have always stuck with me and always will. And the end of Contact is just this like industrial explosion, deterioration of sound. And it, again, the way that the synths modulate and move creates such an energy that I think if you were closing your last album ever as a band, what better way to do it than by talking about UFOs? So I hope I was able to share why I love this album with you. I know I've talked about it for a long time, but still I feel like I could go on because there's so many intricate details that we don't even talk about in regular conversation. Like I don't talk about music in such detail basically ever. Unless it's with my really nerdy musician friends, which shout out. That's what I live for. And so I really love this sort of discussion. So all the rest of these will probably be long-winded too. That's why I said grab a cup of tea, grab a drink. It'll be a while. Doing it right, everybody will be dancing and me doing it right. Next up on the list, at number 4, is Joni Mitchell's Blue. I got chills down my spine even saying that. Joni Mitchell is one of my favorite, if not my favorite folk artist of history. And again, another artist that I grew up on. I listened to Court and Spark because my mom listened to it and her mom listened to it, and I will continue that tradition as folk music is made for. Folk music is a traditional music. This is one of those albums that you will hear musicians talk about to ad nauseum. It's your musician's favorite album, one of those. Every song on here is just so incredible, and the way that Joni constructs a story and the way that she marries it with a melody is breathtaking. The honesty and I don't want to use the word purity, perhaps clarity. The clarity that she exhibits her ideas is so unashamedly Joni Mitchell and so confident and so assured of itself that it feels like something that's been here forever. And I think that's what good folk music should do. It should establish the fact that it seems like it's out of time, it's eternal. From the opener, All I Want, to the closer, The Last Time I Saw Richard, it weaves a story of yearning and loneliness and accepting where you are and the path least or most traveled that you've decided to embark on. It's a story about her being out of the country and being in and out of New York and being in and out of lovers. And I think it just encapsulates the feeling of being a human being pretty well. I have plans for this YouTube channel, which include talking about lyrics in songs and deconstructing them and talking about what they mean or how they make me feel. And Joni Mitchell's Blue is going to be one of those albums that will be featured on that series whenever it comes to fruition. Just the opening line of All I Want, I am on a lonely road and I am traveling. Looking for something, what can it be? Or a song like Blue, I quote this all the time. I quoted it in one of my other videos, but songs are like tattoos. And that has grown on me, and it's one of the guiding philosophies that I decide to live my life to. Like, songs are able to capture intimate moments in history and in a person's life, such like a tattoo. It's a reminder of where it comes from and the mindset that you were in and the emotional place that you were in when you decided to get a tattoo. I mean, all of these things are like little markers. Joni does that better than anybody else. My Old Man and its sprawling harmonies that just ebb and flow and move and meander in such logical but natural ways. I mean, we don't need no piece of paper from the City Hall. That melody is just, it'll be in my head until the day I die. And I really love how this album can talk about relationships in both a positive and negative way, which is such a more realistic approach at talking about human relations and interactions, because it's never all good. It's never all bad, usually. It's a mixture of both, and that's where we get bittersweet and we get melancholy. The balance of those two contrasting ideas is what makes this album to me so compelling and so deeply, deeply human. It's also just so calming. Little Green I love hearing about the Northern Lights, and I think Joni's lyricism really puts me in a place physically that if I close my eyes, I can imagine where she is and what she's doing and what she's thinking, and it just means so much to me. It's hard to be able to quantify things like this. Carrie, get out your keys. Just every song on here carries the fourth track, a lovely tune. The harmonies on here are just beautiful. I saw a video of Joni at the festival. I can't remember which one it was, but it was the first time that she's taken the stage since she had her brain aneurysm, I think. The woman that sang it with Joni, I think I'm remembering this correctly, brought tears to my eyes. And just the fact that Joni Mitchell can be a figure At this point, I'm speaking more to her as a musician and the legacy that she's left, more than this actual album, because again, all of her albums are just incredible. But Blue is a great song. Just the instrumentation and the folk arrangements on here are so minimal, but so full of life. And even just a simple guitar part, or like a strummed dulcimer, can be so communicative and rich with meaning and texture, even though it's so simple. And that's the beauty of folk music. Then the song California, which is a pining song. I really relate to this as a Californian, so the line's like he cooked good omelets and stews, and I might have stayed with him there. But my heart cried out for you, California. I relate to that, especially the more time I spend here. This Flight Tonight is, again, a great example of how Joni makes a melody feel so natural, even though sung by somebody else might feel, I don't know how to describe it. It would be different, for sure. It wouldn't be Joni. But this Flight Tonight, especially the chorus, it feels like it's pushing and trying to get out of a place, and just the iconography of airplanes and traveling and not finding home and not finding comfort, or finding it but yearning for something else like California. There's so much nuance in the way that she contrasts comfort and loneliness, happiness, sadness, discontent, contentment. A lot of people have talked about River as they have this whole album, but using the motif of a Christmas song to talk about Christmas time instantly puts you in that space and in that perspective of cheeriness and warmth with the holidays. But like the rest of this album, the holidays for a lot of us are is a time of mourning, loss, or extreme comfort. We kind of exaggerate the way that we feel about life because we're presented with such rich comfort in the sense of the holidays, that it creates, again, a really interesting dichotomy between feeling good and feeling so bad. River is another great example of just that, and talking about, I wish I had a river I could skate away on. I wish I had a river so long I would teach my feet to fly. Oh, I wish I had a river I could skate away on. I made my baby cry. He tried hard to help me, he put me at ease. And he loved me so naughty, made me weak in the knees. I'm so hard to handle. I'm selfish and I'm sad. And all of this is accompanied by what sounds like a Christmas tune. And that's what makes Blue really exceptional. A Case of You is just such a beautiful feeling of infatuation. Lyrics like, oh, I am a lonely painter. I live in a box of paints. I'm frightened by the devil and I'm drawn to ones that ain't afraid. I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. Because that's something that, as an artist, I think speaks to a lot of our sensibilities, as we live in a box of paint. Oh, I could drink a case of you, darling, still I'd be on my feet. It's this feeling of yearning, but being okay with the feeling and wanting it, but also not wanting it, because the idea of like drinking a full case of wine and being so drunk, but needing to handle that feeling of being drunk and feeling like you need to be cognizant. And I've just been there so many times. It's the insistence of being all right and feeling preservation and being able to move through things, but in a really toxic, negative, destructive way. I mean, drinking a case of wine is such an insane thing that it'll kill you. And stipulating that I would still be on my feet after that, I can't describe it any better than a survivor trying to survive. The last time I saw Richard, the closer to this album, I don't know if this is what the entire album's about, but it does feel like a nice conclusion. It's very specific. I mean, just the opening line alone. The last time I saw Richard was Detroit in '68, and he told me all the romantics meet the same fate someday. Cynical and drunk and boring, someone in some dark cafe. A lot of discussion about Joni Mitchell's career and, wanting to escape this crazy scene. Not on The Last Time I Saw Richard, but it's just a lot of talk about music, and especially, I think she was with James Taylor, not at the time, I can't remember. Some famous guitarist that I think worked on the album, and it's just such an interesting discussion of like musicians being in love or artists being in love with each other and seeing the romanticized aspects of those relationships personified. Yeah, again, I could talk about Joni Mitchell for so long. She's such an important figure in my life that really feels deeply maternal and comforting, and is somebody's music that I can turn back to time and time and time again, to be reminded that it's not just me who goes through these things and these feelings and these emotions, it's other sensitive people as well. Dude, my phone's gonna die. Talk for too long. Moving on to number 3. Björk's Vespertine. I have it on vinyl. If you are my friend in the past year, you have heard me talk about this way too much. Thank you for putting up with that. I am not sorry. I don't apologize. This album is so cool that I don't care if I bore you to death. Go listen to the record. Everything about this album is what I want my life to be moving forward. And let me try and explain what that means, because I don't even think I know what that means. Like the Joni Mitchell record feels very positively maternal. Sorry, I just got distracted by the beautiful artwork that is in the centerfold. This album expresses such an honest approach at sensuality, because I think this is Björk's love album, maybe. This is one of those albums that I put on when I'm feeling bad or when I want to feel something because I'm just numb and empty, which unfortunately in this digital age, I feel like that happens more and more, where I become numb and frozen and cold and distant because the world is like that sometimes. But there's also pockets of life that are not like that and are so warm and so cozy and so intimate. And maybe it's just me and maybe it's just my experience, but statistics have shown that Generation Z is one of the loneliest generations to exist. And I think there's a real pining for relationships and intimacy and physical touch that I lack in my life. And I think this album helps me process that and helps me think about what it's like to be intimate or to have such a deep, deep connection with somebody that it makes you create an album like Vespertine. And that's not to say my life is devoid of those experiences and those emotions, but it's more to just speak of the lack of frequency and how unusual of a time being with somebody is. I just think it's, at least for somebody like me, it's rare to have something so profoundly moving that it influences an entire period of your life and compels you to create, I'm going to use the word beauty, I'm going to try and find something else, to create something so truthful, honest, meaningful to an experience that is exponentially profound on you. Hidden Place is just, it sets me in the mood. I imagine myself in Iceland or in a snowy place or a place that is not here right now. What better way to start an album than a request to escape? The sample, like the chopped sample, is so cool at the beginning, and Björk, I'm gonna say Björk. But anyway, the feeling of having someone new come into your life and wanting to just escape and spend every moment with them, the consumption of your soul that is binded with somebody else's, like it consumes you as an ego and you become something much more homogenous. Hegemony? It's a good album too. The production on this song and like the way that the choral vocals come in the chorus tickles my brain. And this happens a lot in this album, where you have just these expansive group harmonies that add such a mystique and whimsical feeling to this album. I think that's a really good word, is whimsical, to describe Björk's music. Because it's the way that she constructs a melody is so unconventional and so not specified to the Western ear, which I think this is why this album that I discovered in the past year really stood out to me. I think I really struggle with trying to search for things that make me feel something so profound. Because I think that's what we're all searching for in life in general. Like, none of us want to live monotonous lives. None of us want to be bored. Because I've listened to so much music and because it's such an important part of my life, it takes a lot to move me. And so when I find an album that does that, I just want to like hold it tight and choke it out to extract every drop of emotion. It's hard to stop yourself from wanting to just re-listen and re-listen and re-listen, because eventually you start to lose that unfamiliarity with music that makes it feel like an exploration or something special. And so I try and reserve my listens to this album for moments that are special. And I'm still waiting for a moment where I can listen to this album with somebody. That'll always be there. It's something to look forward to. Because something else to look forward to is the song Cocoon, which I look forward to hearing every time. This is the song that best summarizes what I'm talking about. I have never heard a song talk about being this intimate with somebody. Like, the levels of how personal this is almost makes me uncomfortable, but like, as I've engaged with it more, it's become more normalized. And I think, especially in Western culture, where we're so prudish about nudity and sexuality and everything's repressed or exploitative, this sort of work stands out in the sea of that sort of behavior and transcends societal constructs to just talk about what it's like to be a human and what it's like to fall in love and what it's like to share your core with somebody. I'm just thinking about the intro synth and the, I guess, micro beats, kind of electronic production. It's kind of glitchy and impermanent. I can hear all of it and it sends shivers down my spine. And I think that's how I know that music is good, because I'm really fortunate to have a physical response to music in the way that I get goosebumps when something stands out. And it's a visceral reaction, and I have that every time I listen to Cocoon. Who would have known that a boy like him, after sharing my core, would stay going nowhere? That's enough to make a yearning heart hurt. The way that this song and this album makes me think about my own life and my own experience is part of the magical quality of Vespertine. Forgive me if this is overly personal, but songs like Cocoon make me want to be that good of a person to somebody else, like a partner. I want to be able to have these meaningful experiences, and part of that is by being, for lack of a better term, a good person or a good partner. And it just makes me excited to live more and to build my character to one day have an experience like what she's talking about in Cocoon. And I love how staggered the drums are and how lopsided but still locked in they are, and how unusual the sound design is, but complements lyrics and the human aspect to it so well. Sort of similar to how Daft Punk did it. It's Not Up to You is another standout track. All of these are standout tracks. What am I kidding? This is why it's my third favorite record of all time. How Do I Master the Perfect Day? 6 glasses of water, 7 phone calls. If you leave it alone, it might just happen. Unthinkable surprises about to happen. Ooh, there are the chills again. One of the ways that new music transitions from being new to a favorite of mine is I immediately fall in love with the sonics of a song, but the more I listen to it and more I engage with it, not only the more I pull out, but the more the philosophy of a song will draw me in, and I'll find myself compelled by the story and by what's going on. And especially in this song, it's a really good reminder as I find myself in this new period of my life where I have no discernible career right now. Everything's new and an unknown, and hearing this song is like a professor telling me everything's going to be all right and that your project is good. I don't know. Any sort of reassurance. This song speaks to a truth that it's not up to you, and you can try as best you want to be a good human being and to master the perfect day, but truthfully, nothing like that actually exists, because the world isn't in your control. The world's not in your power. You can't change everything as much as we would want. And I love the percussion on this, It has like, it sounds like a shaker, but it's not a shaker. It's really gentle and sounds so in your ears, and textured is the word that I'm looking for. But also the way that like the bass and the strings interact with each other and swell, doom, 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 doom. Like it's just like the way that it moves as a composition is so compelling. And then you get to the chorus, which is this release of all of the things that we were talking about in the lyrics moving up to this point. It's the statement of the philosophy of it's not up to you. And it has these dueling vocals where they're different takes of Björk talking about this mantra, and it allows her to overlap those two takes. And the way that she sings, she extends the ends of her phrases into the next lyric, and it's kind of this like trade-off effect where it feels like it's all-encompassing me. And like the more I try and escape the idea of it's not up to you, the more I'm sucked back in by these overlapping principles. And then the end of the song, there's too much clinging to peak, there's too much pressure. I'm working on a lot of different musical albums at the moment. I just finished what I would consider my college era. I'm talking about this a lot in this video, but I made an album every year of my college career, and now that I'm out of that, I have to ask myself, what do I do now that I've learned how to make music? That's essentially the question that is dictating my entire life right now, because I've learned how to do these things and I've spent a certain time mastering my craft, and now I'm asking myself the question of what do I want to make? Why do I want to do these things? Music like this helps answer those big questions because it reminds me to not put too much pressure on that decision and to not even think about it, because when I was first starting and learning how to do these things, these weren't even things that I would think about. It would just be instinctual of what I think sounds cool or what I'm feeling, and to not over-intellectualize the process of creativity. And that's how this song speaks to me personally. So the next song is Undo, and I think this is a good song to talk about the instrumentation of the album, because I think that takes center focus instead of a song like It's Not Up to You or Cocoon, where I think the lyrics take focus. I think in this song, the synth and the drum production and the strings and the bells are what I draw to, because it's a song that's talking about it's not meant to be a strife, it's not meant to be a struggle. And again, it's reminding me not only as a musician, but as a person. These are things that you can't control, but you can choose your response to them. And by looking at things that push back against you and you find resistance in them where there shouldn't be, this song is a good reminder to think about music or life or whatever your focus may be at the moment, and to acknowledge that if you're struggling against it so immensely that it might not be the right way. For example, I've really been struggling lately with writing lyrics because I'm worried about them being good or not, which is so not what I should be worrying about as a lyricist. I'm sure anybody that writes can kind of relate to this feeling of perfectionism. I really struggle with that because I'm insecure about my work as a whole, and I'm worried that I'm never good enough, and I'm worried that people won't be happy with my work or connect with it. And if you worry about these things, it'll hold you back, and it will cause you to have strife in your life, and it'll cause you to struggle. And I think, especially when I apply this song to the idea of lyrics and writing, it's not meant to be a struggle. And if it is, then you should reapproach and figure out a new way to do something. Next up is the song Pagan Poetry. I love how movie-like, I want to refrain from using the word cinematic because I use that as an adjective a lot, but it really expresses something that's unusual because the sounds are so novel to me. And that's what I really love and get drawn in by. And also the percussion and the bass, it's just growling and the boom, boom, boom. It's so driving and so full of passion and emotion, and the lyrics are just really speak to that sensibility. Also, the last leg of the track is so pristine. I love how it just strips away all the instrumentation and she just repeats the refrain, I love him, I love him, I love him, I love him. And when she goes into her upper range of her voice as she's talking about wanting somebody, it's just that like me for real, Björk. Frosty is a beautiful instrumental transition. I don't even know what instrument this is. It sounds like a music box, but I think there's like, I don't even know. And because I don't know, I love it that much more. I love not being able to fully understand art that I'm consuming. That's part of the joy of it. It's figuring out why it speaks to you. But this is a really calming instrumental. I especially love like the scale runs that kind of sprinkle out through the track. It gives a lot of momentum and allows the track to have this push and pull. Even though it's 1 minute and 41 seconds, I feel like it still is a full experience. And that transitions into Aurora, which this is also one of my favorite songs. The way that she uses snow and walking as bit crushed sample percussion is so cool, and it has definitely inspired me to do a similar thing with taking field recordings and processing them in a way to create new sounds and percussion. I think they did a lot of this on this album, where it sounds that I've never heard before, and even after listening to this record, I struggle to find music that sounds anything like this, because I think a lot of it is like found sort of production. This is one of those songs where the lyrics tells a very simple experience and shares what it's like to be in Aurora, which I have never experienced. So I don't fully know what it's like to see that in the snow in Iceland. So that's why this song kind of transports me into a whole new world, which I really love about it. The percussion tickles, and for lack of a better term, I mean, this whole album was meant to be sent over really compressed MP3s that are low quality, but it was mastered and engineered in a way that maintained the sense of tangibility while presented in a low quality way. And because of that, even on a hi-fi system, all of the production is like it's in front of me. I mean, I feel like I could touch this stuff. In Echo, a stain. I'm sorry you saw that. I think this is one of the more interesting contrasts to the rest of the lyrics in the album, because it kind of sets itself aside from the infatuation. Like, this one feels like a more honest approach at looking at the situation that you're in, because it's sort of desperate, but sort of apologetic and like self-aware at the same time. I'm sorry you saw that. I can't say no to you. It's admitting that you're fully lost in this person and in this thing that you become unpredictable to yourself, essentially. You go into this primal space of existing where I'm sorry you saw that because I don't know where that came from, or I'm sorry you saw that. That's a very embarrassing thing that normally I wouldn't do, but you have drawn this reaction out of me and I can't say no to you. The allure of a person can be so strong that it changes you as a person. And I think that's really what this song is sort of talking about, but again, in a very self-aware way. And I don't want to say gritty to describe the instrumentation, but it feels darker. It feels more foreboding. It feels more contemplative and reflective. It feels like it comes to an unfavorable conclusion in the sense of like, I don't want to be this, but you saw it and it happened, so it is me, and it's coming to terms with that. The next song is Sun in My Mouth, and I think I would be remiss to not mention the harps on this specific song. And the harp really is a reoccurring motif throughout the album that I think is the perfect instrument to talk about sensuality, maybe besides a classical guitar. But the harp is heaven-like, it's angelic, it's romantic, it's yearning, it's delicate, it's all the things that this album personifies. And it's used specifically in this song, the reoccurring do-do-do-do-do, which that's not the right pitch, but that's the melody. It sounds like it's posing a question, and that question is, will I complete the mystery of my flesh? I think this album is really discussing being a person and trying to navigate something that is so alien to you, which is you, while also being you. It feels like an exploration of ego and what it means to have two egos combine again into one. I will wait out till my thighs are steeped in burning flowers. I will take the sun in my mouth and leap into the ripe air alive, with closed eyes to dash against darkness. The sun in my mouth, an energy so bright and so consuming. Heirloom is a track that I have a very specific memory to, of listening to it. It was a really weird time in my life where I was about to graduate, and I took a really long walk and really was able to see my life in front of me in its clarity. One of those rare moments. And I was listening to this, it was during the fall, as all of the leaves were changing. It was throughout all of the farms that surrounds my local town. I was just walking through them and listening to Björk tell a story about a dream that's reoccurring. And I was thinking about reoccurring thoughts of my own and how it intertwines with how absurdly strange everything is. Her account of her dream is, again, so bizarre, but in the way that dreams are, but so poignant, where you swallow little glowing lights, we lose our voices, my grandmother bakes for me. And it's just these like stabs of little fragments of memories and moments and feelings, but at the same time, the music seems reflective and contemplative in the same way that like the Minecraft soundtrack sounds that way. And it's like expansive and delicate, again, to use that word. I would say this album in the frequency spectrum is on the higher side of the spectrum. So there's more elements with treble in them, essentially, like the harp or like the bells or the high harmonies. That's what I mean when I say delicate, to give a less subjective term for it. This song specifically, with the production, allows me to enter this soundscape of a world where it's populated by reversed drum samples and weird percussion hits and growling resonant synths. It comes together to really elicit the emotion of fantasy or of something that is not of this world. I'm trying to use something else to describe dreamlike, but it really is just that. This album as a whole, songs like this contribute to the feeling of being able to transcend where you are right now and to go into a place that is more expressive. Harm of Will is an interesting song because it comes near the end of the album, so I think my focus is exercised by the time we get here. So this is probably the song that I've paid not least attention to, but I haven't been able to take all of it in yet, and it's one that I am just now, upon reading the lyrics and reflecting on it, realizing the totality of what this song means. Especially like the reversed breaths that happen after the end of Björk's lyrical phrases. Again, it's just like so human but so electronic coming together to create something out of this world. But if this song was even just the strings, it would still be compelling. And I think the way that Björk sits on this ocean of harmony and melody creates a platform in which it feels right to be able to explore deeply intimate moments and explore them in an honest way, because the strings sort of bring this emotion out of you, and the way that this album sounds allows you to go into a place where you can feel vulnerable and feel open and accepting to topics that we don't talk about. How often do you hear sexuality discussed in music in a way that's not meant to be explosive or exploitative or showy? This is just talking about the actual action as if it was anything else, in a way that is very human and very open. And it's The Harm of Will, which is a really interesting title. It's kind of talking about like what Sun in My Mouth or An Echoist Stain talk about. I mean, really what this whole album talks about is this idea of giving yourself up for somebody else while becoming more you and having harm come from your will and what you want. And the last song, Unison, it's really interesting that it's unisona on the back of the LP because in other languages, of course, there's feminine and masculine qualities. I don't know the Icelandic language, so I'm not going to pretend I can comment on that, but it is a feminine article. Regardless, Unison is one of the best closers to any album I've ever heard. I think the ways that the synth melody kind of is very playful with the really pizzicato strings. They play a really interesting rhythm that I'm still trying to internalize, but it all adds up to this really moving piece that just kind of progresses its way forward and cuts into its own narrative. I never thought I would compromise. Let's unite tonight, we shouldn't fight. Embrace you tight, let's unite tonight. I thrive best hermit style. That specifically is a line that really just speaks to my heart as a human being, because I do thrive hermit style. I enjoy solitude and I embrace that because it allows me to reflect on everything and restore my energy. Björk seems to be one of those figures as well, but in this album, she talks about being alive with somebody else. And that's what I find really interesting about this song. But to conclude, the way that the orchestra and the chorus vocals really blend together to create a really emotionally compelling closer, it has so much momentum to it, is the word that I've been looking for. But ultimately, how else would you end an album that is so sensual, so intimate, so honest, than with an exclamation saying, we shouldn't fight. I never thought I would compromise, but here we are, embracing life, embracing somebody else, becoming a part of a whole. That is why I absolutely love this album. It is one of my favorites and will continue to be, I hope. Moving on to the next one. Number 2. It is Radiohead's In Rainbows. Because of course it is. As I've said with a lot of these albums, of course it is. In Rainbows is one, I don't even think I have to talk about these songs individually that much. This album has been with me on so many of my bad days, my good days, whatever it might be. For a long portion of time, this would be the only thing that would like get me out of bed in the morning. Like I would be struggling to go to work and to like get my ass beat by nature and the weather while working at my nursery when I was doing that. This album motivates me to be alive and to go do things. 15 Step is a great example where it's just so irresistibly driven and filled with energy, as this whole album is, and I think that's speaks to Thom Yorke's expressiveness as a vocalist and the whole band in general to be really emotive with their playing and to play like melodies and rhythms that surgically cut reactions and emotions out of you. Body Snatchers is another example that is just so unbelievably upfront and so raw. I haven't heard a lot of tones like that for guitar, and I just think talking about being stuck in a body, yeah, I am stuck in this body and I have to be okay with that, and songs and art like this helps me do that. But the next song is Nude. This song slaps. I again, don't want to say too much about this record because I'm sure you've heard a lot. I walk a lot, and so I use that time to listen to music, but also to reflect silently as well. And this is one of those albums that, this was a walking album for sure. I spent a lot of time in like the forests of Santa Cruz going through and just observing and being fully here for listening. I think that's what I really love about this album, is that it demands your full attention, and every time I put it on, it gets my attention. Weird Fish's Arpeggi is just a really interesting way to talk about depression and being stuck under thousands and thousands and thousands and endless amounts of water. Thousands of gallons, I don't know. How do you describe an ocean in terms of volume? But whatever it is, Thom Yorke is stuck under it, and I feel that. And I feel like this album teaches me how to avoid pressure sickness as I transcend the depths of the ocean and resurface. And it tells me how to breathe right, and it really guides you. But that drum groove of Weird Fish's, the start, that's in my brain forever. Philip Selway is a very melodic drummer, I would say, and one that is also like a metronome, which, if you're a drummer, is one of the highest compliments I could possibly give you. All I need is a song that I really relate to these days, of being trapped in a hot car if you're a dog and like somebody else is the only way that you're able to open the door, or being like a bug wanting to be attracted to light, and it's all I need, and you're the only one because I feel this way because it's all I have, and it's like wanting something more, but not getting it. And I love that, because that's all of life. We all want more, and we never get it. Faust Arp and Jigsaw Falling Into Place, and Reckoner actually, are all songs that took a while to grow on me. They didn't quite sink in the same way that like 15 Step and Body Snatchers instantly clicked with me. These were kind of growers. But songs like Reckoner are great with the strings. I mean, Joni's string arrangements on the whole album are really spectacular. And I think he, not on this album, comes into his own, because he was doing string orchestration before, but this one, it feels like he really found his voice as a composer, and I think that's awesome. I mean, same thing with all of the band members, really. Colin's bass grooves couldn't be replaced by anything else. I mean, the way that Joni constructs his lead guitar work, that's supported so flawlessly by Ed O'Brien's soundscapes and rhythmical inputs, mixed with Tom York's expressive vocals, just creates such a deeply rich emotional experience that's very poignant and concise, while also being not loose or improvised, but a natural flow. House of Cards is one of those songs that I don't know if people like it as much as I do, and every time I hear it, I'm just like, this is the sound. This is the sound of melancholy. And the way that the distorted guitar plays is so fascinating, especially, hearing about like swingers and talking about separating from your partner and being with somebody else and having a house of cards and be so tense and so rigid, and then your life just falls apart like a house of cards. Speaking of falling, Jigsaw Falling Into Place. Does life ever make sense? I don't know. It's like a puzzle. No. Nothing makes sense. That's the whole fun of it. And Jigsaw Falling Into Place, I love the music video. I love the camera strapped to their bandmates' heads. It's such a good video. Videotape is a phenomenal closer. Like, in the same way that Björk is really expressive about intimate moments, Tom York is expressive about depressive moments in a very similarly honest approach. Videotape is one of those, I know, yeah, the syncopation and then blah, blah, blah. But just how like rigid and like straightforwardly depressing this song is awesome. Ultimately, this record is one that I put on when I need a return to energy, when I need something that'll get me out of bed, to jumpstart my day, and to remember and remind me why I like music. I just like rock bands, and this is one of the rock bands that does it best. Speaking of rock bands that do it best, the OG rock band. Number 1, the Beatles, Abbey Road. Let's hope I finish talking about this album before my camera goes, because I might not stop. The Beatles. The Beatles. What do you say about the Beatles that hasn't been said already? Not a lot. But I can tell you that I grew up on this band. And this is probably the music that I heard most often, maybe besides like Jack Johnson. This band is what gave me an insight into musical history, and what essentially inspired it all, I think. I don't know. Who's to say? That's the thing about art or people that are profound. You can't really pinpoint anything because it's so expansive that it's hard to talk about, but I will try my best. It was hard to choose a favorite Beatles album. I mean, it could have gone to Revolver, it could have gone to Sgt. Pepper. Abbey Road is the Beatles at their peak. This has always been here for me, so it's difficult to like talk about, because it feels like talking about my hands or something. Like, my hands have always been there. How do you describe something that's always been there and describe it like you're seeing it for the first time? That's that's why I'm struggling, because songs like Come Together, Something, Oh Darling, I Want You, I mean, they're all so integral in my musical development that it's hard to pinpoint exactly what it is about this album that I love so much. So I don't know if I'm going to talk about all the songs individually, because this is probably one of the most talked about albums in all of history. So I'm not going to reinvent the wheel there, but I just think that the unique experience of like growing up as a Gen Z person, being shown musical works from the 60s and like really feeling like I'm experiencing history I think that was some of the coolest things. And knowing that this band is, you know, some of the pioneers of studio technology and stereo sound. This is the band that pushed the envelope, and that is what I find most inspiring about it. How if this came out, let's be real, guys, if this came out today, it would still be fresh and new and timeless. That's what the Beatles do best. Do I have a favorite song? That's really difficult. Maybe Golden Slumbers. Maybe Golden Slumbers. Maybe Carry That Weight. Actually, no, Carry That Weight. For sure, it's Carry That Weight. And that's funny because there's so many other incredible songs. Some guy asked me, what's your favorite guitar solo of all time? And I thought about it for a long time, but I didn't want to seem like a fool by like sitting there and not saying anything. So I said, it's Something by the Beatles. That song has some of my favorite guitar work of all time because I don't want to say simple because it's not simple, but it's approachable, it's accessible, yet it is infinitely complex. I really do view this as two albums almost. I mean, you have the singles and the side 1 and then side 2, which is the medley. I think the medley is one of the most innovative things the Beatles ever did. And I know from interviews with especially John, who was like, I think it's rubbish. But I just think that's so crazy for an artist to be like, yeah, this is dog shit. Well, my camera died, so I think that's my cue. Concluding thoughts about this record, this Abbey Road in front of me. I love the medley. I think it's really interesting that they're talking about such subjects like Polythene Pam. I think it's a great song. Sun King is really meditative, contemplative, beautiful. God, there it is again. You Never Give Me Your Money, speaking of college, really stands out to me because out of college, money spent, see no future, pay no rent. Yeah, I was listening to that after I just graduated college and was like, oh my God. And again, that's the beauty of returning to these albums after years and years of listening to them, is I find something new to relate to every time. And it just goes to speak about how timeless it is, that at any stage in life, you can see something in these albums and relate to them, even if you're in a completely different era or chapter or whatever container you want to put your life in. It's anybody can love Abbey Road, and that's why it's my favorite album of all time. Yeah, that's fair to say. It's Abbey Road. Come on. Well, thank you for joining me on this album experience. I talked a lot. There you go. Some albums that you should listen to if you haven't already. I really enjoy doing this long form content talking about music, and I would love to continue doing this, so I will. No reason not to. Besides the pain that I inflicted upon myself with editing this video. I filmed for like 2 hours. That's yikes. That's a lot of footage. But yeah, anyway, I hope you enjoyed. I want to be engaging more on YouTube as I move throughout life because it's been one of those platforms that I spend most of my time on YouTube when I'm on social media or the internet in general. And it's been so good to me, because I feel like I've learned so much. I can Google how to do anything on YouTube and there's a tutorial. That's how I became a good engineer, truthfully. But I love making content and I love talking about music, so I'm gonna keep doing that. In the meantime, I've got some projects I'm working on that I'm excited to talk about later when they're actually done. But a lot of music to be made. And I think that's what's awesome about these albums, is that these albums have inspired the things that I'm doing now, which is, what a joy. And without further ado, my name is Braylon Addison. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a great day or night or whenever you watch this in time. I hope it finds you well. All right, take care.